Coming up on today's episode of the Salesman Podcast.
When we speak about introverts, if we are using the definition strictly from psychology, how psychologists use it, it is simply, do you get more energy as a result of being around people or less energy? Is it something that fires you up, or is it kind of drains you at the end of the day? And if you're drained at the end of the day, you're an introvert. If you are just ready to go for even more, then that is the definition of an extrovert.
Hello, Sales Nation. I'm Will Byron, host of the Salesman Podcast, the world's most listened to B2B sales show, where we help salespeople not just hit their sales targets, but really thrive in sales. Click subscribe if you haven't already, and let's meet today's guest.
Hi, I'm Dorie Clark. I'm the author of Entrepreneurial You, Reinventing You, and Stand Out. And I work with companies and also talented individuals to help their voice be heard in a crowded and noisy landscape.
In this episode with Dorie, we're diving into the step-by-step process for introverts to crush it when they are networking in a business environment. And then it slowly translates into just how introverts can win in B2B sales in general. And so with that said, let's jump right into the show. Are there any traits of being an introvert? Are there any advantages to being an introvert when we are going out there and networking and putting ourselves out there?
The answer, Will, is yes, absolutely there are, but you have to dig a little bit. You have to sort of get behind the surface because, of course, as you and I both know, the stereotype is that, oh, of course, every salesperson is an extrovert. That has to be why they're in sales. They love pressing the flesh and they want to be out there 24 hours a day. And so it seems a little counterintuitive that an introverted person might even go into sales. But the truth is, as with many things in life, if you can essentially do counter programming, if you can do the opposite of what most people are doing, that can be a path to success as long as you're strategic about it. And so specifically where extroverts excel is they are always wanting to be meeting new people, out there socializing, kind of this light touch, constant stimulation. And for introverts, that can be a lot. That can be too much pretty fast. You get overwhelmed. But the flip side of it is that introverts are often very good at deeper, slower connections. They're often good at the quieter things, where it's getting to know someone, asking thoughtful questions, really going deep. And that can lead to even better sales relationships over time because you really come to understand your customer and can grow something meaningful.
And we'll probably play on this stereotype of a salesperson throughout the conversation because maybe it was true 10 years ago. I don't think it is an effective strategy now to be going. I like the term you used of light touching people and being in constant stimulus. You're just going to annoy people at this point. I think people have so much going on in their lives, especially in the B2B space. You can't be light touching a CFO or a room of C-suite executives without them going, who is this crazy dude or woman running around annoying everyone? But with that, Dorie, before we jump into the ins and outs of this, do you have a definition of what an introvert or / extrovert actually is?
Sure. So there's often a lot of misconceptions about this. So it's great that you're asking the questions so we can kind of get it out of the way. There is often a lot of confusion amongst the general public in terms of the definitions being tossed around between introverts and shyness. That's, sometimes that gets wrapped together, but they're actually very different things. Part of the reason why a lot of people, might say they're an introvert and then everyone's like, oh, no, you're not. That can't be true, is that they assume that introverts are the one kind of cowering in the corner. They're not.
Yep.
They're not talking to anyone. They look like you're about to whip them or something, and it's not right. Essentially, when we speak about introverts, if we are using the definition strictly from psychology, how psychologists use it, it is simply, do you get more energy as a result of being around people or less energy? Is it something that fires you up, or is it kind of drains you at the end of the day? And if you're drained at the end of the day, you're an introvert. If you are just ready to go for even more, then that is the definition of an extrovert.
I think so. I totally agree. And I'm glad you came out with that answer because otherwise I would have been totally confused because that's what I've been led to believe the definition between an introvert and an extrovert as well. And for me, considering and things are changing now with different products and services that we're doing on the back end of the podcast and the sales school. But up until this point, for the past 4 years, all my revenue has come from interviewing legends like yourself, Dorie. Obviously, we're not face-to-face. We're doing this over Skype, over the internet. But it would be not unreasonable to assume if you followed the stereotypes of introvertedness and extrovertedness that you would consider me an extrovert in that I love getting on these shows. My voice goes higher when I'm having these conversations and I'm waving my arms around like a madman. And I appreciate this when people are watching on the show on YouTube. I probably look a little bit crazy and I probably look like quote unquote extrovert. The hard truth is, so you're my third interview today, Dorie. I've got one more, and then my girlfriend's coming over, and it is bonfire night, and so we're going to go over to watch the fireworks. Literally, it's a park just across the road from where I live. There's going to be 70,000 people there. By the end of that, I'll have had enough of dealing, speaking, surrounded by bumping into people for the next 2 or 3 days. It will literally take me 2 or 3 days of I will continue to create content. I'll continue to do all the sales stuff that I need to do to keep the business running, but I will not want to be around people. So that kind of puts me in this pathway of an introvert. And I'll ask you, I'm sure you don't mind sharing with the audience, but would you consider yourself as someone who is a well-known author who I see popping up on LinkedIn and other places all the time, getting yourself out there and you're coming on shows like this? Would you consider yourself an introvert or an extrovert?
Yeah, thank you, Will. For sure, I consider myself an introvert, and that is surprising to some people because I have a job where I have to go out and give talks and things like that, and so people might assume that just by dint of being on stage, oh, of course you're an extrovert, but as an introvert, you certainly can do it. You just need to plan a little bit better sometimes because it would be very easy in our culture to be swept along and, oh, well, there's this speech and of course people want to have lunch after that and then they want to have meetings and oh well don't you want to come for drinks and before long your entire day is just spent putting all the energy out there. And so I have had to become very strategic actually about how to manage the arc of my energy so that I can perform well at the things where I really need to. And then like you kind of go hide for a little while so that I can recharge and be, back to being a normal, polite human.
The audience will love this. If you've ever met me at a sales conference, typically I'll go there and do the Salesman Podcast live. I'll interview the speakers at the event kind of live in person, and then we stick it up on a separate YouTube channel and a separate audio feed. Well, the audience kind of meet me there at the show as well, and I'll always speak to whoever I can. And a couple of times there's been an actual queue of people wanting to meet me, which is incredible. That I always use it and tone my own ego down, saying that in that room I end up being a little bit of a celebrity. And as soon as you walk out that room, no one gives a shit who you are and doesn't care about me whatsoever. But in that room, I feel like a little bit of celebrity. I feel like I've got to be myself, but I've got to be appropriate in my actions because people are watching me and they know who I am, and I can't get away with anything. But at these events, lunchtime, every time I book an hour and a half with no interviews, and I go and have a lie down in my hotel room. I've done this every single event I've ever done. I don't think I've ever shared this with people. So if you ever wonder where I am at the middle of a conference, if I'm doing interviews there, I've just got out of the room. I've just had 10 minutes, an hour to myself. Even if it's just flicking through Facebook or whatever on my phone, I do need that little bit of space. So, Dorie, with all that in mind, and I'm going to use your words here of we need to plan better. With regards to networking, and I want to see if we can systemize this, if there's a step-by-step process for perhaps we're at an industry event and we want to go meet people. What do we need to do before the event to plan out our day so that we're going to have a more effective networking session within that environment?
Yeah, great question. So one of the principles that we can fall back on, Will, is something that the author Tony Schwartz talks about. He's written books about this, written for Harvard Business Review, and he talks about the concept of managing your energy, not your time. And I think this is especially useful because there's a couple of ways to look at it. The first is that all of us have natural circadian rhythms where we're performing at our best. For most people, for most adults, it's in the morning, although not exclusively. If you're a night owl, maybe you kind of peak in the afternoon. But the first question to ask yourself is, okay, when am I at my best, and what is the most important work that I have to do on this particular day? So if you're at a sales conference, all right, well, clearly it's going out, meeting people, having the conversations. If you're at your desk, maybe it's making outgoing calls, who knows? But you want to align when you feel your best and are at your best with the most important task so that you can really excel there. If nothing else, that will help guarantee you a pretty good win. But then the other thing is to think about the arc throughout the day. There are going to be structural limits on what you can do. I mean, you were mentioning earlier, you have scheduled 4 podcasts for the day, and then you go and have some socializing, although that's kind of high octane socializing. I can imagine that if you suddenly said, it'd be more efficient if I could schedule 7 podcasts today, and it certainly would be. But I imagine the reason you're not doing that is that you have probably realized that there are serious diminishing returns and you wouldn't be able to do as good of a job. I mean, is that right?
And that is 100% right. I used to do on a Monday 6 episodes, and we used to publish 3 or 4 episodes a week. And so I'd always be kind of buying myself a little bit of time. So every quarter, I could have a week off of recording or whatever the math worked out as. And I found exactly what you're describing, Dory, of by that sixth episode, number 5, I was still okay. By the sixth episode, I would be a mumbling, jumbling wreck. And those podcasts would always go downhill pretty quickly. And that's from the experience of doing it or attempting to be efficient with my time, as you were describing.
Yes. So it's a little bit of trial and error at first. You kind of want to test the boundaries, hopefully in low stakes situations. But over time, you begin to develop a sense of, okay, I can reasonably do X number of meetings or X number of calls per day. And then you work around that and structure it, because it is a lot better, as we all know, to do the certain amount you can really well, rather than just packing it in and feeling bad at the end of the day because you underperformed.
And just another layer on top of this, and tell me if this is relevant, but I know that if I don't take at least one day off work completely per week, I'm just a mess by the beginning of the next week. I know that I have to, I don't know if it's physically recharging, so I'll still work out or do activities or do whatever physically that I would have done in that routine, but I need to take a day off kind of per week. And I typically take actually a weekday off because I get more done on the weekend. No one's pestering me. There's no calls coming in. There's very little content that I have to push out. So I'll take off a Wednesday, a Thursday. I'll go to jiu-jitsu in the morning. I'll do whatever I would typically anyway. And I have a far more productive weekend session then than I would otherwise. But yeah, as I said, I have to take that one day off a week. And I think that's probably advisable for the audience of whether they're extroverted or introverted, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that that's right on, and I suppose I suppose this is somewhat ancient wisdom, right? It's like you got your Sabbath day
Hmm.
here, but they were onto something. I mean, in modern entrepreneurial culture, we kind of do work 7 days a week, and it's just on turbocharge all the time. But and I mean, we do it for a reason, which is that we are able to be more successful if we're putting in the hours. But the smartest professionals understand that there's a really fine line, right? If you outwork the competition, you will win. But if you are working yourself so hard that it's damaging, then you're going to lose. So what is that margin in between? And it's different for all of us, and we have to figure out, what are the rituals and routines that we do in between. Maybe it's keeping up a physical routine like the gym or eating healthy or whatever, but how do you keep yourself honed? But for introverts, there's kind of one more level on that, which is managing the psychological energy and just making sure that you've had enough downtime. But if you can learn to do that, it's just making smarter choices. I mean, it's like when I was a little kid, I used to go to the movies, and every time I went to the movies, I'd get migraines. And I'm like, what is this? Why am I getting migraines at the movies? And eventually I realized, I'm like, oh, you freaking idiot. It's because I had like 4 Cokes and a box of chocolate. And once I realized, oh, don't do that, then I was fine. And so similarly, we can learn to refine it so that we're able to be at peak capacity and just maintain that sweet spot for ourselves.
So I want to explore, if we can, and then we'll get very literally and practically into the steps of networking, especially at an in-person event or an industry conference or something like that. So we'll come on to that in a second. We'll come into that in a second, Dory. But before that, I want to just investigate a little bit further, or investigate slash ask you the question because I have no idea. This link between, or the seeming link between shyness and introversion. Is there actually a link, and this isn't just a common misconception, or is it just complete nonsense and media, film, TV have inadvertently used the word introvert when they actually meant to use the word shy?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I'm actually not aware of what this, if there's a study been done about the statistical correlations. But Susan Cain, who is probably the most famous introvert spokesperson. She wrote the book Quiet. She did a big TED talk, etc. She wrote an article about this that I thought was very interesting, where she was pointing to some well-known examples of people who were introverts but not shy, and people who were shy but not introverts, and so it kind of tests the margins audience a little bit. So just to sort of expand it, shyness in many ways, if we're again going back to the definitions that psychologists are using, shyness is actually about a fear of judgment. That is why the people are kind of off in the corner. It's, oh gosh, but if I say something, what'll they think of me? Or is that the right thing to say? Or something like that. And so Susan Cain points at someone like Bill Gates, for instance, who's very much an introvert. I mean, this is a very bookish guy, as you might imagine. He takes a couple of times a year, he literally takes a vacation by himself, and he calls it a reading vacation. And he just spends a week literally like reading all the books he wants to read. That's an introvert, but not shy, not afraid of judgment, just kind of goes for it. On the other end of the spectrum, Susan Cain points to Barbara Streisand, who is somebody who's literally so painfully shy. For years, she stopped performing. I mean, she's kind of popped back up periodically, but there's been years where this, famous woman has not done concerts because she is so terrified of stage performance, and yet very much an extrovert and kind of craving that audience feedback. So, I think that there may be a statistical correlation, but I think even more broadly, it is in the public imagination the two are linked, but you can really sort of separate it out.
Fair enough. That makes total sense. Well, for anyone who's clicked on this video, this audio podcast, and have gone, oh, wait, well, I'm not an introvert, or I am an introvert. I didn't think I was, but it turns out I am. And they're confused, or they were confused. We've hopefully solved that for them now, Dorie. But they've still got the problem of, well, I'm still shy no matter what other label I'm put on top of this. And I love this of they have a fear of judgment. Well, if you are put in a position where you've got to, your job, your sales manager's stood behind you and you've got to booth at an event and you've got to go and talk to people and your job probably depends on it. How can we get over this fear of judgment? And let's leave behind for a split second introverted and extrovertedness. If someone is just nervous of speaking to new people, other than a sales manager saying getting on with it, is there any strategies that they can employ to even just improve their motivation to go out and do it?
Yeah, for sure. So there's a couple of different pieces, right? The first one, of course, as you might imagine, is about actual skills and abilities. And then the second is your perception of those. So in some cases, it's possible that you are shy or fearing judgment because maybe your skills actually aren't up to par, and which is okay. We don't know everything, starting out. So, for instance, there's a lot of cases where somebody might have to do public speaking or presentations as part of their sales work, and maybe they're not a great public speaker. Maybe they've never really practiced it. It doesn't come to them naturally. And so, if that's the case, if it's actually a skills gap, the good news is that is eminently doable, right? You can go to Toastmasters, you can take a class at the local community college or extension school or whatever it is. That is something that it's just like, okay, we have the recipe. If you are willing to do the work, go out, practice, learn how to do it. You will automatically feel better if you possess the knowledge that you need to have. That's step one. Now, step two, which may potentially be layered on it, is your perceptions of those skills. So you might actually know how to do it, but just feel weird, feel scared about it. And so in those cases, what I would recommend is a couple of things for people. The first is studies have shown this again and again, we always feel better if we are able to experience the momentum of small wins. And so I think it's important to put yourself in a situation, frankly, where sometimes there's a low bar so that you could actually see yourself doing well and sort of practicing with the training wheels. So it's like, oh, okay, well, I was able to do that, and you see yourself doing it. It helps you envision it. The other piece that's really critical is sometimes finding a mentor or a buddy, and that's a person that both you can emulate, you perhaps respect their skills and can pattern yourself after them, so it's a little easier to envision what it looks like. And perhaps if you're close with that person, you can sort of trade back and forth, talking each other up to be helpful. So those are some initial steps that I'd suggest, Will.
So come back into the world of introvertedness for a second here. Other than the strategy of knowing when we are at our wit's end, that's probably how I'd describe it, and we need to get out of the room and have 5 minutes to ourselves, just to have a cup of tea, cup of coffee, to read an article on our phone, whatever it is, before we can are we recharged enough to go back in and battle everyone in this room and network and do our company and ourselves proud of putting our kind of message out there? Other than that, which I feel we've covered here, are there any other strategies that introverted individuals can use to improve not necessarily the amount of people that they can speak to within a given set of time, because that's just scaling up on what we've already talked about, but to have, which you talked about at the top of the show, to have more thoughtful conversations and to have deeper conversations with these individuals. If that is a advantage for an introverted individual, is there a way that we can leverage that to kind of give us the biggest advantage we possibly can?
Yeah, absolutely, Will. So, what I would suggest for introverts, and this is a strategy that I very much follow in my own life, is that the best place that you can succeed is by playing a different game than what other people are playing. You can do okay, right? I mean, if you're left-handed, you can survive in a right-handed world. If you're an introvert, you can survive in an extroverted world. But isn't it nicer? Isn't it better if you are playing a game that you create so that you can max it out? And so in my case, something that I learned is that I really don't feel comfortable in these sort of big amorphous networking events, like the sort of proverbial like 500 person cocktail party. No one's got their name tag on. You don't know who anybody is. You just have to plunge into the crowd and introduce yourself and make ridiculous small talk. I hate that. And so I decided, you know what? I mean, okay, sure, every once in a while you have to do it, but I'm not going to make a habit of it. What I am going to do instead is I am going to create my own events. I'm going to create something that I invite people to, and to which, over time, ideally, and in fact, this has happened, people start to really want to get invited to, which is I started doing these small dinner parties, and I would invite, let's say, 6 people, 8 people, 10 people, a much smaller, more manageable group. I would curate the guest list. So it was people that I thought were interesting, that would enjoy each other. I would curate the conversation. So I would know it would be interesting and meaningful and that people would get something out of it. And it was calm and it was quiet and it was totally introvert friendly. And it became something that was so much deeper and better than just, oh, you met somebody for 2 minutes at a cocktail gathering. If you have dinner with somebody for 2 hours, 3 hours, you're really going to get to know them, and they are going to frankly be grateful that you invited them to a great event where they were not just able to interact with you, but to meet 10 other super cool people. So that has been the cornerstone. And whatever your thing is, whether it's a dinner party or you invite people for breakfasts or you invite them to your house to watch sports matches or to your backyard for a barbecue. I mean, whatever it is, you can do that and make it your signature thing. And that can be a great way that you can build relationships.
Amazing. We might, and this gives me a brilliant idea, which we'll touch on now, and this might kind of translate into another area which you are an expert in, Dory. But if there's no escaping that, if you work in B2B sales, you're going to be on the phone with people. You've got to be able to have momentum in a conversation. You've got to be able to ask them for things and be proactive. And it's not necessarily the best job for someone who is shy. Whether you're an introvert or an extrovert, I don't think it matters. I think we've kind of cleared that bar now, and it's almost irrelevant at this point. But with that said, if you gain energy from being on your own and you can make 2, 3 really impactful calls each day versus an extrovert who just wants to be on the phone and wants perhaps some attention and needs to be go back and forth and having 15 different conversations and pretending that they can multitask, and there's emails coming in, there's beeps going off, and they're off to see this person and running around. If your competitive advantage is that you can sit in a quiet environment and have deep, meaningful conversations, is another way to go about this, rather than going to all these network events, is it perhaps to create content so that people come to you rather than you go and have to chase them? Is that a reasonable thing to say?
Double snap, my man. That's right. That is exactly right, and that is something that I've written about. I actually did a couple of articles that might be of interest for your listeners. One was called "Personal Branding for Introverts," and the other was called "Networking for Introverts," which came out a few years ago from the Harvard Business Review. And folks can get that for free online. But one of the strategies that I actually suggested in my HBR article in "Networking for Introverts" is in fact content creation. Because essentially, when we think about relationship building, networking, Part of it is getting to know the other person, which introverts are often good at because they want to ask a lot of questions. But there's another half of that, which is having other people know who you are. And so if you are creating really useful content that people think is interesting and smart, they are going to remember your name, and they're going to say, "Oh, this guy makes a lot of sense. Who is this Will Barron? How can I get to spend a little more time with him?" And frankly, that is the greatest thing ever for an introvert, because how, like, if you're an introvert, it is kind of horrible to have to plunge into a group of strangers and just be like, "Oh, hi, can I talk to you?" It's awful. But if somebody comes up to you and says, "Oh, hey, Will, I've really wanted to meet you," like, that's the easiest thing in the world. Who doesn't want that? For every introvert, it just smooths the path, and it makes social connections just incredibly easy. It's one of the very best things that you can do because it just tips the balance of power. It helps people come to you instead.
We'll get into in a second. We'll wrap up with this story of what we need to do to get started with this. If someone's listening to this and a light bulb has just gone off in their brain and they go, "Oh, maybe I can't do an interview show," which is what I was thinking about doing. And I was going to interview my customers, or I was going to do something like that to create content, but I could sit there on my own. And I feel there's a real feedback loop here of, if you sit there on your own, do research on your customers, do research on your market, create useful content for them, you're going to be immediately able to have a deeper conversation with them than someone who is just out there cold calling for 7 hours a day and spamming individuals. You become positioned as an expert in the space by default, by nothing other than the fact that you're, one, writing, producing whatever, the video, the audio, the written content, whatever it is. But then two, you're learning more than other people who aren't doing this research to create content. And I know this, and a great example of it is I am promoting a product called the Sales School. And I won't dive into it, so this doesn't turn into some cheesy pitch. But I'm doing a video a day for the next 100 days, which is essentially mini bits of content from all the content in the Sales School. And it's actually making the Sales School content better because I'm going out and finding out what people actually care about from all these other bits of content. It's driving more conversations. And inadvertently, and I didn't mean this to happen, it's supposed to be a B2C product. It's supposed to be me to my audience. So I'm cutting out the middleman. The eventual goal is that we only sponsor, the sponsorship slots on the podcast are only our content, our products, and we don't have to rely on anyone else. That's the end goal of all of this. The weird thing is, it's turning into, as much as I'm trying to fight it, it's turning into a B2B product, because I've got a lot of sales leaders email me saying, "Hey, we want to buy 50 of these, a license, a login, whatever it is, for all our sales team." And I'm going, no. The whole premise of it is a lot of it takes the piss out of sales managers. There's a whole series of characters, illustrations in there, and one of them is a sales manager, and he's a terrible sales manager. It's totally non-corporate. There's swearing in it, and the sales managers go, "Yeah, but I'm enjoying it myself, so I think my team will get something out of it." So inadvertently, I'm creating a B2B kind of market for myself by producing these videos and this content. So with all that said, clearly I'm someone who's done this for 3 or 4 years now. You've done it for longer than myself. You've written books, and I'm avoiding writing a book for as long as I possibly can, because I know the effort and work it goes into it. For the audience who, a book is probably too big of an ask for them right now, perhaps they don't have the time to do a new video every single day, because for me, very honestly, each video that comes out, I get another couple £100 in revenue from people signing up to the Sales School, which is reoccurring, which adds up to thousands, obviously, over the course of 12 months or so. So there's real imperative for me to do daily content. But for someone who is introverted, we've established that with them, they're perhaps not shy, so they're happy to be on camera or record a video or written content, whatever it is. And they know that content will be a differentiator for them and set them up as an expert in the space, and will allow individuals to reach out to them to close deals and be proactive about it. Dorie, I'm throwing a lot at you here. Where should we start? Because I'm getting lost myself.
Yes. Well, one kind of easy thing, one low level lift that I would suggest for people is that blogs are great for this. I mean, you don't have to even start your own blog. You could put a blog out on LinkedIn. You could do it on Medium, but this is fantastic, especially because as you were saying, the process of researching is going to make you more knowledgeable. I mean, you read some articles, you read some studies, you're talking to a prospect, and you're able to say, "Oh, well, that's so interesting because, I was just reading that 78% of purchasing managers, blah, blah, blah." And they're like, "Oh, really?" You sound smarter, so it gives you additional credibility. But the great thing, this is amazing. Oftentimes people think that content creation, whether it's, blogs or videos or whatever, only becomes valuable once you get unsolicited inbound inquiries. Now, that is true. That is fantastic. But that is not the only benefit. It takes a long time for that to happen. The very first thing that happens, and part of why it can be immediately beneficial, is that when you are creating content, let's, for the sake of argument, call it a blog post, the minute you have created it, it gives you an additional tool in your arsenal that you can use to be more effective in closing sales. So when you talk to a prospect who's saying they're having a problem with XYZ, and you're able to say, oh my gosh, I just wrote an article about XYZ and how to solve that. Would it be helpful if I send it over? And they say, oh my gosh, Will, that would be great. And you send them this article. They immediately say, wow, this guy understands my problems. This guy makes sense. Oh, it looks like the solution he's suggesting isn't bad either. Maybe I'll give him a call back and we'll give him the business. It's a huge competitive differentiator.
And just to go one step deeper on this, and you might have some content creation strategies which you can share with us. The first piece of content I typically recommend that people make, and they can put it in their email signature. It's super simple. It can take an hour, and you can add to it for weeks and months, years to come. And you can make it as fancy or as kind of unflattering as you want. It could be a Microsoft Word document linked in your email address. That's all it has to be. But I recommend people do a frequently asked questions page of just document all the questions you get asked more than kind of once a week of how does this work? How do I buy this? I don't understand this. And then product specific stuff of what's the size of this, the dimensions, what other organizations or what other products does this integrate with? Put it all down in one document. And then that's the first piece of content, which is a living, breathing piece of your mind that I guess can add value at scale rather than you going through all these questions. Clearly, you don't want to just faff someone off if they're too lazy to look at it themselves. But they click that in your email signature and immediately they go, oh, and I was going to ask this, and this. And you've moved them down the sales process without having to have 15 phone calls and speak to individuals within the account. And again, I just think it sets you up as an expert, which is worth its weight in gold regardless, because it separates you from everyone else. Have you got any other kind of the first, second, or third pieces of content that B2B salespeople or non-professional content marketers, I guess is the better way of putting it, people who aren't doing this for a living, what's the first two or kind of 1, 2, or 3 pieces of content that people should create, Dorie?
Yeah, I love your idea about the frequently asked questions, Will. I think that's right on. And what I would say is the most important thing to keep in mind, which I think salespeople understand intuitively, although I think it's hard sometimes to port it over to content, but it's the exact same thing that you guys do in your daily life in dealing with customers, which is that no one is looking for your specific product. They're looking for the solution to their problem, and they don't necessarily know what that is. And so if you can create content that is optimized through the customer's lens of what to do when you're experiencing blah blah blah, and just lay it out. I mean, obviously you want it to be a smart, fair article so that it's not here's your sales pitch and we're calling it a blog post, but we're hitting you over the head with it. Yeah. But if you can write a thoughtful, fair article that explains, look, you're probably having this situation. There's a lot of things you could do. You could do this, you could do this. Here's some pros and cons, but here's one thing that I do and that I've seen work for my clients. You can throw that in, and all of a sudden, you're essentially leading the customers through a micro sales cycle just in the course of the article. So I think thinking through what the presenting symptoms are that your customers are experiencing, and then writing knowledgeably about that. I think those things are great. I think another thing that I would suggest as well that can be really valuable in terms of deepening the relationship is you don't have to write stuff that directly even ties into your products. If your customers are experiencing certain issues or problems that, maybe it's not about anything you can sell them, but you want to be that trusted advisor for them. And so even if it's tangential, if you can write content that is helpful to them and shows that you understand their world and that it's actually useful to something they might experience, it's a give. It's a pure give, and it shows, oh, good. Will isn't trying to sell me something every single minute he talks to me. Will has got my best interest at heart. I said that I was having this issue, and he gave me this really helpful article. What a good guy. And that is extremely valuable as well.
Amazing. And I think to go one level deeper on this, if I hesitantly will, because there's already a lot to go out here in this episode already, you've got the opportunity to, there's probably a technical term for this, but I call it future pace in your articles as well. So you have, this is the problem that gets solved, and this is the end result of you looking fantastic, looking great in front of your boss and getting a promotion and blah, blah, blah. And here's a quick testimonial of someone who's been there and done this, and I helped them through it. And you've got the opportunity to make through content, which salespeople, I think they really struggle with. And I struggle with this sometimes myself, even when I'm selling now the ad space for the podcast. I focus on, you're going to get ROI. You give me $5,000 for a 1 month sponsorship of the podcast. If your product is, this is typically the numbers, if your product does more than, if it's priced more than $30 to $40 a month in kind of recurring revenue, so a SaaS product or a CRM or a sales tool, whatever it is, you're going to do at least 5-6 times ROI on your ad spend. That's the results I've had for pretty much every customer I've ever worked with, including the likes of Salesforce, HubSpot, all these huge organizations. So I tend to focus, being analytical, focus on, and I think this is not necessarily a male or female thing, but it's like a more masculine thing versus perhaps a more feminine salesperson would go down the route of emotions and end results, which is probably the place where we want to be with all of this. I focus on ROI. Some people go, great, that's all I need. A lot of people go, so what? A lot of people are promising ROI. With content, we've got the opportunity to plan this out, to tell a story. And I find it's far easier to do it on a piece of content than it is in a conversation. I struggle to do this live in person, but I'm humbly pretty good at doing it through a piece of content of, I get to say, well, here's the ROI. And then people like you become heroes within their space, within the organization, because it leads to this, and this. They look good in front of their boss and all these kind of emotional things that get tied on the top of it. So just wanted to make a note of that. And with that, Dorie, is there anything, we've covered a lot of ground here. We've gone from introvertedness to shyness to studies. I appreciate when you bring up studies. It kind of aligns you as a true expert on this in front of the audience. And then we've gone into content and a whole lot more. Is there anything that we've missed? Is there any huge leverage points for introverts that we should just quickly cover before we wrap up?
Yeah, I think the most important thing, Will, when it comes to introverts is just understanding that even though being an introvert is a disadvantage in the workplace, as the workplace is commonly conceptualized, it actually can be a real strength. It can be your opportunity to excel and outperform other people if you are willing to take the initiative to just twist things around enough so that you're playing your own game, so that you're not trying to do the same events, the same type of relationship building as all of your peers. If you're looking to other folks and saying, oh, how do I do exactly what they've done? It's probably not going to go as well. But if you can say, how do I take what I'm really good at and bring that to work and bring that to relationships, I would much rather have somebody who's a salesperson who's developing deep, long-lasting relationships with people where the customer lifetime value is enormous, as compared to somebody who's flitting around and touching here and there and getting little quick hits that don't amount to something. I think introverted salespeople can, in fact, be the best, but we just need to kind of think about how we can do it on our own terms. And that's something I wrote an ebook about this, actually, called Standout Networking. And it's something that I really believe in and am excited about as well.
Amazing stuff. Well, we will for sure link to that ebook in the show notes to this episode. And with that, Dorie, I've got one final question to ask everyone that comes on the show. I'm going to put a bit of a twist on it because I've asked you before, I think. And that is, if you could go back in time and speak to your younger self and you could give her one piece of advice that would help her become better at selling, but it could be nothing to do with being an extrovert or an introvert, what would that one piece of advice be?
Yeah, I think that if I were going back in time and getting better at selling, one of the most important lessons that I learned was the importance of framing and making sure, I mean, this is so foundational for salespeople, but I think we all can learn and sort of take this in. The customer in general is not really able for a lot of products to understand what something should be valued at. I mean, we all kind of have a sense, okay, well, we see what a can of Coke costs, so we know what that costs. But for a lot of things we're selling, they're weird, they're complicated, they're bespoke. They have no idea. Is it $1,000? Is it $10,000? Is it $1 million? They don't know. And so the more that we can contextualize and frame it so that they understand what is appropriate and why it's appropriate, and sort of set these anchors, the better success we will have. And it's not about doing some weird trickery or whatever. It's all part of the customer education process, so they understand how things fit in, and they can make more educated decisions as well. And that's something that I've been excited to adopt in my own life and work. And I'll just mention too that if people want to dive in further, I have more than 400 free articles available on my website at dorieclark.com that I hope people might enjoy.
And just a final thing to top on this, because I think this is important. I love the fact you brought this up, Dorie. How much of if value is the perception of someone, if people choose what value is as opposed to this kind of Coke cost a dollar or whatever kind of, I've literally no idea how much a kind of Coke costs. Does that put me out of touch with the audience? I've no idea, but I've not drunk a can of Coke in years. With that said, Dorie, when we're dealing with large enterprise deals that are 100,000, 50,000, £1,000,000, that the value is in the kind of the mind's eye of the buyer. How much of this comes down to your, as the seller, your confidence in the value that you bring to the conversation?
Yeah, I think it's so important, Will. I mean, in fact, one of the things that I write about in my work, and I have a book that's kind of a companion to Standout Networking called Stand Out, and one of the key pieces that I talk about in it is the concept of social proof, which is another concept that's big in psychology. And essentially, it's what is your perceived credibility that you bring to the table? There's a million people out there selling a million things, and if you can manage to convey to your buyer, not through chest thumping or whatever, but just through the affiliations, the associations that you have, through the gravitas that you present. If you can show that you are credible, it goes a huge way down the path of making it easy for them to choose to do business with you, have trust in you, not quibble over prices, because they understand, oh, this is a premium offering. This is an appropriate thing. And so making sure that you are setting yourself apart by the credibility that you are demonstrating, whether it's through things like writing for high profile publications, whether it's through having a successful podcast like you do, whether it's having published a book or being the head of a professional association, any of those things really matter.
Amazing. I love the way I was just about to jump in and say it myself, but you brought it back to content. And I think content is key and central to all this. And with that, Dorie, you've mentioned the website, but tell us a little bit more about the books and where we can find them.
Absolutely. Thank you, Will. So yeah, my most recent book, appropriate for just about anyone in sales, is called Entrepreneurial You. It is about how to create multiple income streams in your business. And for folks who want to learn more about that or dive in, I actually have a free 88-question Entrepreneurial You self-assessment. Folks can get that at dorieclark.com/entrepreneur.
Amazing stuff. Well, I'll link to that in the show notes to this episode. And with that, Dorie, thank you for your time. I appreciate you shedding hopefully some light on this for the audience of what an introvert is, what an introverted person isn't, how that they can use this to their own advantage. And whether you're an extrovert listening to this, an introvert, whoever it is, I guess the moral of the story is that we should always be looking for ways to stand out on our own terms, and whatever we are good at, leverage that to our best ability, and that separates us from the competition. And with that, Dorie, I want to thank you again for joining us on the Salesman Podcast.
Thanks, Will. It's always a treat to get to talk with you.